The California sky was still black when Claire Harmon pulled her rental car into the shadows at the edge of the visitor parking lot at Camp Pendleton. She cut the engine. She did not turn on the radio. She did not check her phone. She simply sat in the darkness and watched the main gate the way a person watches something they have been waiting a long time to see. The base was just beginning to breathe. Security lights burned white and cold along the perimeter fence. A pair of Marines jogged past in formation, their boots hitting the asphalt in perfect rhythm, their breath clouding in the early morning chill. Somewhere beyond the row of barracks, a bugle call drifted through the air, thin and clear, like a voice reaching across a great distance. Claire had heard that sound at 47 different military installations across the United States. She had sat in 47 different cars in 47 different parking lots in the dark before dawn, waiting for the same kind of morning. The faces changed, the bases changed, the names changed, but the shape of what she was about to do never changed. Today was person number 48. She reached into the back seat and picked up the manila folder she had been building for 3 weeks. She did not need to open it. She had read every page so many times that the words had become part of her, the way the words of a prayer become part of a person who has said them long enough. Master Sergeant Wade Colton, United States Navy, SEAL Team 3, 15 years of service, 3 combat deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, 1 Purple Heart, and 16 formal complaints filed by subordinates over the past 18 months. 12 of those complaints had disappeared, not misplaced, not lost in bureaucratic processing. Disappeared. Buried by the same network of former Special Operations personnel that had been protecting Wade Colton for the better part of 5 years, moving him from base to base whenever the heat got too close, cleaning his record behind him the way you clean a trail in the woods, leaving no trace that anyone had ever passed through. Claire set the folder down on the passenger seat and looked at the gate again. She had been many things in her 28 years. She had been the daughter of a retired Army sergeant from Knoxville, Tennessee, who told her when she was 7 years old that the bravest people he had ever known were the ones who kept moving forward even when they were afraid. She had been a cadet at West Point who graduated in the top 3% of her class. She had been a Ranger qualified officer who spent 3 years proving she belonged in spaces that had never been built for women. And then she had been something no woman had ever been before her in 37 years of the unit's existence. She had been a Delta Force operator. The first. She had earned that. Every bruise of it, every fractured relationship of it, every night of it that she spent so exhausted she could not form a complete sentence. She had earned it by being better than the standard, not just meeting it, by refusing every single time to let the door close in front of her. And then on a warm June night in 2022 at Forward Operating Base Warhorse in Iraq, 4 hours after she had helped pull 4 American hostages out of an ISIS cell in Mosul and brought them home alive, Lieutenant Colonel Aaron Steele had come to her quarters and taken something from her that no amount of training had prepared her to defend against. Not because she was weak, because she had trusted him. She broke his nose getting away. She reported it the same night. 6 weeks later, the investigating officer told her there was insufficient evidence to support her allegations. Steele had 20 years of service. She had 4. His record was decorated. Hers was decorated too, but apparently not enough. They gave her a choice: stay and serve under his command, or resign honorably and preserve her benefits and her dignity. She chose the door. What they did not know when they handed her that choice was that she was going to spend the next 2 years making sure no one else ever had to stand in that doorway. She joined the Defense Intelligence Agency. She built a case methodology from the ground up. She identified patterns, networks, systems of protection that existed not in any official document, but in the informal brotherhood of men who believed their shared sacrifice gave them the right to govern themselves beyond the reach of ordinary accountability. 47 cases in 2 years. 47 men who had believed the same thing Wade Colton believed, that their credentials made them untouchable. 47 times Claire had proved them wrong. She checked her watch. 5:23 in the morning. In just over an hour, Wade Colton would walk into the Camp Pendleton main mess hall the way he walked into it every single morning of his life here, like a man returning to his own kingdom. He would pause at the entrance. He would survey the room. He would work the floor, stopping to talk to command attention to remind every person in that building of exactly who he was and what he had done and why that mattered. And Claire would be sitting at a corner table reading a technical manual, drinking a cup of coffee, paying him absolutely no attention whatsoever. She knew exactly what would happen next. Her phone buzzed. A text message from a number she had saved under a first name only. Brooke. The message was 3 words long. I am scared. Claire typed back without hesitation. I know. So was I. That does not change what happens today. She put the phone in her jacket pocket, picked up the folder, and stepped out of the car into the cold California morning. Brooke Calloway was 24 years old, and she had the hands of someone twice that age. Not in appearance, but in the way she held them pressed flat against her thighs, white-knuckled like she was trying to keep herself from floating away. She was sitting behind the wheel of a Honda Civic in the parking lot behind the commissary when Claire found her, and she flinched when the passenger door opened, even though she had been waiting for exactly this. Sorry, Claire said, settling into the seat. Didn't mean to startle you. Brooke exhaled. It was a long, shaking breath, the kind that carries the weight of a night without sleep. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Her dress uniform was immaculate anyway because she was that kind of person, the kind who maintained the exterior even when the interior was in pieces. I kept thinking about it all night, Brooke said. What you're going to do in there? Tell me what you told me the first time we spoke, Claire said. I need it recorded one more time, from the beginning. Brooke looked at the recorder Claire placed on the center console. Then she looked at the commissary wall in front of her. Then she began. October 15th, 6 months ago, I was conducting routine inventory in Supply Room C, Building 14, 1700 hours. Most of the base was at dinner. I was alone. Her voice settled into the cadence of someone who has told a story so many times it has become a kind of wound that never fully heals. Master Sergeant Colton entered. I acknowledged him and kept working. Senior enlisted have legitimate reasons to check supply inventory. I didn't think anything of it. She paused. Then he locked the door behind him. Claire did not speak. She had learned over 47 cases that silence at this moment was not absence. It was presence of a different kind. He moved toward me. I stepped back. He stepped forward. He backed me against the supply shelving. And then he said, Brooke's jaw tightened. He said, Navy SEALs take what they want. Those exact words, like it was something to be proud of, like it was a philosophy. She pressed her hands harder against her thighs. Then he touched me, my chest, my waist. I said no. I said stop, multiple times. He kept smiling, like I was playing a game I didn't understand the rules to. What happened next? I pushed him, hard. I caught him off guard and I ran. Got to the door unlocked. It got out. Filed a formal complaint the next morning. She paused. The morning after that, Major Holloway called me into his office. This was the part Claire had been waiting for. Not because she did not know it, but because it needed to be said again out loud into the recorder for the record. What did Holloway tell you? Brooke's voice went flat. The way voices go flat when emotion has been replaced by something harder and colder. He told me I had misunderstood the situation. That Master Sergeant Colton's behavior was consistent with how senior Special Operations personnel mentored junior Marines. That making false accusations against a decorated SEAL would have serious consequences for my career. She paused. He told me to think very carefully about whether I wanted to proceed. And you withdrew the complaint. What choice did I have? Claire stopped the recording. She looked at Brooke's profile, at the rigid line of her jaw, at the way she held herself together with nothing but will and stubbornness, and the kind of pride that refuses to let anyone see the full cost of what they have survived. Brooke, Claire said quietly, I need to tell you something I have not told you before. Brooke turned. When you filed that complaint, Major Holloway did not wait for the investigation to begin before he acted. Claire watched the shift in Brooke's eyes. He contacted Wade Colton first, before he called you in. Colton knew the contents of your complaint before you ever sat down across from Holloway. The system did not fail you by accident. It was operated deliberately by people who knew exactly what they were doing and chose to do it anyway. The silence in the car was absolute. So Holloway, Brooke said slowly, was never going to help me. No. He was protecting Colton from the beginning. Yes. Brooke turned back to the commissary wall. Something moved across her face that Claire recognized because she had felt it herself in a room at FOB Warhorse 2 years ago when an investigating officer had told her there was insufficient evidence. It was not grief exactly. It was the specific, terrible clarity that comes when you realize the people who were supposed to protect you were the danger all along. "Then let's make sure it costs him," Brooke said. Claire picked up the recorder, pocketed it, checked her watch. 20 minutes to 6. "Stay in the commissary until I text you," Claire said. "Keep your phone on. When this is done, you will need to be ready to give your statement again officially on record to people who will not have the option of making it disappear." Brooke nodded. Then very quietly she said, "Are you afraid?" Claire thought about that for a moment. It was an honest question, and it deserved an honest answer. "No," she said, "but I remember what it felt like to be." She got out of the car and walked toward the mess hall as the first gray light of the California morning began to separate the sky from the hills. The mess hall at Camp Pendleton could seat 1,200 people at full capacity, and on a Tuesday morning in early April it came close. Claire arrived at 6 o'clock 30 minutes before Wade Colton's established routine would bring him through the main entrance, and she used every one of those minutes. She chose a corner table on the east wall, the one with sight lines to all 3 entrances and to 4 of the 6 security cameras mounted in the ceiling corners. She sat facing the main doors. She set her technical manual on the table in front of her. She ordered coffee and toast from the server, who came by, a young lance corporal who did not look at her twice, which was exactly what she wanted. Then she began the patient, invisible work of understanding a room. She had done this at 47 different military dining facilities across the country. The geography was always slightly different, but the physics were always the same. Every room had its gravity wells, the tables where the dominant personalities held court, the paths that junior personnel navigated around them without conscious thought, the invisible architecture of rank and reputation that shaped how people moved through a shared space. Understanding that architecture was how you placed yourself effectively within it. At 6:15, Major Elise Hartley entered the mess hall. 41 years old. Duty officer for the morning shift. 22 years of service, a spotless record, and a report she had filed 8 months ago about concerns regarding Master Sergeant Colton's conduct toward female personnel. That report had vanished from the system within 48 hours of submission. Hartley had not spoken of it since because the message had been clear enough, but she had not stopped watching. That distinction mattered. Claire had spent considerable effort ensuring that Major Elise Hartley was the duty officer this morning, not because she needed Hartley to do anything in particular, but because when the moment came that required a senior officer to respond, she needed that officer to be someone whose instinct would be to let justice proceed rather than contain it. You planned for everything you could plan for. That was the discipline. At 6:25, First Sergeant Earl Decker took a seat 3 tables away, alone with his coffee and his eggs, and the particular stillness of a man who has been in the military long enough to understand that most situations are best observed before they are responded to. 45 years old, 23 years of service. He had filed 2 formal complaints about Colton's behavior in the last 3 years. Both had been buried by Holloway, but he had filed them. He had kept trying, in a system designed to discourage exactly that. It was not nothing. The mess hall continued to fill. The noise level rose with the population, the comfortable overlapping chaos of 1,000 people beginning their day. Trays clattering, coffee being poured, the smell of eggs and bacon and institutional toast, the controlled restlessness of a military institution in the first hour of its morning. Claire turned a page in her manual. She did not look up. At exactly 6:30, the main doors opened. She felt it before she saw it. A change in the room's energy, slight but unmistakable, the way a slight change in wind pressure can be felt before it can be measured. Conversations did not stop, but they altered. Heads turned. A current moved through the space, invisible but real. Wade Colton entered the mess hall the way he entered every room he had ever been in, like he owned it. 6 feet 3 inches tall. 220 pounds of muscle built over 15 years of elite service. His dress uniform was immaculate, his bearing was absolute, and the seal trident on his chest caught the fluorescent light the way he intended it to, the way a flag catches the wind when it is raised at the right angle. He paused just inside the doorway. He surveyed the room, not anxiously, not even consciously perhaps. It was simply what he did. The visual assertion of a man reminding himself and everyone else of exactly where he stood. Claire did not look up. She was aware of him the way she was aware of every detail in the room, with the peripheral precision of 10 years of training that had become as natural as breathing. She tracked him through the serving line where the staff behind the counter smiled with the particular warmth of people who have learned that keeping powerful men happy is easier than the alternative. She tracked him as he moved through the dining floor, stopping at tables, exchanging words, generating the easy laughter of people performing their respect. He was halfway through the room before she felt his path begin to shift. It was subtle, a slight change in trajectory, the kind of adjustment that a person makes without consciously deciding to make. It pulled by the only thing in the room that was not responding to his presence the way everything else did. A woman he did not recognize, sitting alone, reading, not looking up. That would irritate a man like Wade Colton in a way that nothing else could. She turned another page. His shadow fell across the table. "Morning, miss." His voice was the voice of a man who had never genuinely considered the possibility that he might not be welcome. Deep, confident, carrying the easy authority of someone who had been greeted warmly in every room he had ever entered, and who had no framework for what to do with a room that did not. Claire looked up slowly. She met his eyes. Blue, clear, the eyes of a man who slept well at night because he had never once questioned whether he deserved to. "Good morning," she said, and then she looked back down at her manual. The pause that followed lasted perhaps 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, something moved across Colton's face that was gone before it fully formed. The micro-expression of a man encountering unexpected resistance in territory where he expected none. He recovered quickly. He set his tray down on her table without asking and pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Haven't seen you around here before," he said. The warmth in his voice was still present, but there was an edge beneath it now, the edge of a man whose social instrument was picking up a signal it was not calibrated to interpret. "Victoria Harmon," Claire said. "She used a cover name by habit." Something like that. He studied her, trying to categorize her, to place her in the taxonomy of people he encountered, to understand why she was not responding correctly. "This is a serious military installation. We like to know who's sharing our space, especially civilians with unrestricted access to our facilities." There it was, the first assertion. "This is my space. You are here at my sufferance." Claire closed her manual. She looked at him fully, letting him see that she was neither intimidated nor particularly interested. "I appreciate your concern for base security, Master Sergeant. I'm here on official business." Official business. He settled back in his chair, the posture of a man who had decided to stay a while. What kind of official business brings a civilian into a restricted military mess hall? She took a measured sip of coffee. Let the silence stretch. Around them, she was aware of the room beginning to notice conversations shifting slightly in tone and direction as people picked up on the unusual sight of someone having a conversation with Wade Colton from a position of complete indifference. "The kind that's above your clearance level, Master Sergeant." The impact of that sentence was immediate and physical. She saw it move through him, the shock, the recalibration, the anger rising behind his eyes to replace the confusion. His jaw tightened. His voice rose not dramatically, just enough to carry to the tables nearest them. "Lady, I have been to places and done things that most people in this building will never have clearance to know about. There is very little in this military that is above my clearance level." "Your service record is impressive, Master Sergeant Colton." She kept her voice calm, almost gentle. The gentleness would make what came next cut deeper. 3 combat deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, 15 years of dedicated service to your country. No one disputes any of that. She let him begin to relax, just slightly, just enough. "However," she continued, "your service record also includes 3 formal reprimands for conduct unbecoming a service member, 2 incidents of documented insubordination, and a pattern of behavior across 3 separate military installations that suggests you have come to believe your military achievements grant you license to treat subordinates as something less than equal." The mess hall went quiet, not all at once. In the spreading way that silence spreads through a crowded space when something has been said that changes the nature of the room. Table by table, conversation by conversation, until over 1,000 people were sitting in something very close to absolute stillness, processing what they had just heard. Because that information was classified. It was locked in personnel files that required specific clearance levels to access. The kind of clearance that did not belong to any civilian who had simply wandered onto a Marine Corps base. Claire watched the blood drain from Wade Colton's face. "How do you know my classified file?" "I'm here on official business, Master Sergeant. That gives me access to a considerable amount of information about the personnel stationed at this facility." His mind was moving fast behind his eyes. She could see it. The calculations, the possibilities, the dawning terrible understanding that this was not a random encounter. That this woman had been placed at this table on purpose. That the conversation he had initiated had been the conversation she had been waiting for. She stood, gathered her materials, slung her bag over one shoulder. "This conversation has run its course. I have work to do, and I'm certain you have duties to attend to." She moved a step around him. His hand shot out and closed around her arm. His fingers dug in hard, possessive, the grip of a man who had never accepted the word no and had no intention of starting now. Around them, the silence of the mess hall became something different. Not the silence of a room that had stopped to listen, but the silence of a room that had stopped breathing. "We are not done here." His voice had shed its warmth entirely now. What was underneath it had been there the whole time. "You don't get to drop something like that and just walk away." Claire looked down at his hand on her arm. Then she raised her eyes to his face. "Master Sergeant Colton." Her voice was quiet, completely steady. It carried to every corner of that silent room without effort. "I am going to give you exactly 3 seconds to remove your hand from my person." "Or what?" His grip tightened. "You'll file a complaint, lady. I've been through more disciplinary procedures than you've had hot dinners. Nothing ever sticks. Even now. Even knowing she had access to his classified file. Even with 1,000 people watching. He still believed it. 3. First Sergeant Decker was half out of his seat across the room. Major Hartley was already on her feet. But neither of them was close enough and neither of them was fast enough. 2. Colton leaned closer, using his height and his size, the way he had used them his entire career, as instruments of a certainty that had never once been successfully challenged. "You know what your problem is. You don't understand how things actually work. You don't understand respect. You don't understand chain of command." 1. She saw the uncertainty flicker across his face. Some deep survival instinct, the one that had kept him alive through 3 combat deployments in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, fired a warning that something was wrong. That this situation was not what he thought it was. That the woman standing across from him was not what she appeared to be. He did not listen to it. Instead, he tightened his grip, pulled her slightly toward him, and said in a voice loud enough to be heard clearly by every person in that room, "Remember, I'm a Navy SEAL." Time did something strange. It did not slow exactly, but it became more precise each fraction of a second, arriving with absolute clarity. The fluorescent lights overhead, the smell of bacon and coffee, the sound of 1,000 people holding their breath. Then Claire's body moved. Not thought, not decision. Muscle memory from 10 years of Delta Force hand-to-hand training, the same training that had become as automatic as breathing over 10 years of operational service. Her right arm rotated in the direction of his thumb, the weak point in any grip, the anatomical reality that no amount of physical strength can fully overcome if the mechanics are correct. The rotation combined with the angle broke his hold in an instant. His eyes widened. He was not used to that. He was used to his size being enough. Her palm strike followed before he had finished processing the first movement. The heel of her right hand drove upward at the precise angle and velocity to connect with his jaw and produce exactly the effect she intended. His head snapped back. His eyes lost focus for a fraction of a second. The brief, involuntary disconnect of a brain that has just experienced sudden acceleration. She swept his legs while he was still disoriented. 6 feet 3 inches of United States Navy SEAL, 15 years of service, 3 combat deployments, the most elite special operations training in the history of American warfare, all of it irrelevant in the face of the simple, absolute indifference of physics. Wade Colton went down like a man who had never fallen before and had no idea how to do it. His body hit the linoleum floor with a sound that traveled through the silence of the mess hall like a stone dropping into still water. The back of his head struck the floor, not hard enough to cause serious injury, hard enough to complete the lesson. He tried to push himself up, pride and training and 15 years of never staying down when he was in a fight. But he was still dazed from the palm strike, still fighting to understand what had just happened. And as his head came up, Claire's boot connected with his solar plexus with enough controlled force to empty his lungs and send a single, unambiguous message. The air went out of him in a rush. He collapsed back to the floor, gasping, face flushed, one hand pressed to his midsection, the other trying and failing to push himself upright. 4 seconds. From the moment he said the words to the moment he lay on the floor of his own mess hall in front of every person who had ever looked up to him. 4 seconds. Claire stood over him. Her breathing was normal. Her heart rate was barely elevated. Her posture was relaxed, professional, the posture of someone who has completed a routine task. Around her, 1,000 military personnel sat in absolute, total, unbroken silence. She looked down at him, struggling to find air at the face of a man, watching his entire identity dissolve, and she waited, giving every person in the room time to understand what they were seeing. Then she spoke, her voice carrying through the silence without effort. When someone asks you to remove your hand, Master Sergeant, the appropriate response is compliance. Major Hartley reached them. Her training had reasserted itself over her shock. Stand down. Her voice cut through the room with command authority. Everyone remain seated and maintain order. Hartley stopped a few feet away, looking from Colton, still fighting to breathe on the floor, to Claire standing calm and collected above him. Ma'am, she said carefully, I'm going to need to see identification and understand what just happened here. Claire reached into her jacket and withdrew her credentials. She opened the leather wallet and held it out. Major Elise Hartley's eyes went very still. She studied the identification for a long moment, and Claire watched the understanding move across her face in sequence. Recognition, comprehension, and then something that was not quite fear, but was adjacent to it. The expression of a person realizing that the thing they filed a report about 8 months ago, the report that disappeared in 48 hours, had not disappeared at all. I see, Hartley said quietly. She handed the credentials back. Ma'am, I had no idea you were operating on base. I wasn't informed through normal channels. My presence wasn't arranged through normal channels, Major. That was intentional. On the floor, Colton had managed to get enough air back into his lungs to push himself into a sitting position. His face was flushed. His uniform was wrinkled. His eyes, when they found Claire's, were burning with humiliation and something that was, perhaps for the first time in 15 years, genuine fear. What the hell are you? He said. It was not a challenge anymore. It was an honest question. Claire looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked out at the room, at the faces of 1,000 Marines watching from their tables, young and old officer, and enlisted all of them witnesses to something they would be telling the story of for the rest of their careers. I'm someone, she said clearly, so that every single person in the room could hear it, who doesn't appreciate being grabbed by personnel who believe their credentials place them above ordinary accountability, regardless of what those credentials are. She turned to address the room, not to perform, because this moment mattered, and she needed it to be witnessed and understood. What you just saw, she said, is what happens when someone allows their sense of entitlement to override their respect for other people. Master Sergeant Colton is a skilled and experienced military professional. No one is disputing that. But his accomplishments do not give him the right to put his hands on anyone who has not invited that contact. That principle is not complicated. It does not require advanced training to understand. It requires only the decision to believe that other people matter. Colton was on his feet now, unsteady, one hand on the nearest table for support. His dress uniform was no longer immaculate. His expression had moved through shock and humiliation and arrived somewhere that looked like desperation. This isn't over, he said. His voice was still shaking. I don't know who you think you are, but I have people at the Pentagon who... Master Sergeant Colton? Hartley's voice was sharp. I strongly advise you to stop speaking and report to Colonel Voss's office immediately. But Colton looked at Claire, and something in his face shifted from desperation to a kind of furious, cornered certainty. The certainty of a man who has been protected so many times that he cannot conceive of a world in which the protection does not come. You know how many complaints have been filed against me, he said. 16. You know how many stuck 0. Because the system works for people like me. It always has. The arrogance of that statement, spoken in front of 1,000 witnesses and the duty officer of the base in the aftermath of everything they had just watched, was so complete that for a moment the room simply held it, examining it. Claire looked at him. She felt nothing that resembled triumph. She felt something closer to grief, the specific grief of recognizing that a person's worst qualities are also their most deeply held convictions. "I know exactly how many complaints were filed against you, Master Sergeant," she said. "I know the name of every person who filed them. I know the name of every person who buried them. And I know why the number never stuck." She paused. "That ends today." She gathered her materials. She walked toward the exit. The crowd of Marines parted before her without anyone consciously deciding to part the natural response of a room, making room for something it does not yet fully understand but already instinctively respects. At the door, she paused. She turned back one final time. Wade Colton was standing in the center of the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of 15 years of carefully constructed legend. Their eyes met across the length of the room. "Remember Master Sergeant Colton?" she said. "Being a Navy SEAL doesn't give you the right to put your hands on people who haven't given you permission to do so." She walked out into the California morning. Behind her, the mess hall erupted. She did not look back. The office she had been assigned was on the north end of the base, sparse and government-issued, overlooking a parade ground where Marines were running formations in the growing heat of the mid-morning sun. She sat at the desk and typed her incident report with steady hands. The hands that had broken Aaron Steele's nose 2 years ago at FOB Warhorse, the hands that had not shaken since. Her phone buzzed. A text from Brooke Calloway. "Everyone is talking. Are you okay?" She typed back. "Phase 1 is complete. Keep your phone on. Your testimony will be needed soon." She set the phone down and opened the file she had been building for 3 weeks. 16 faces, 16 names. The survivors of a 5-year pattern that had been allowed to continue because the people responsible for stopping it had made a different calculation, the same calculation that had been made 2 years ago at FOB Warhorse, when an investigating officer decided that 20 years of Aaron Steele's service outweighed the truth of one night. She looked at the faces. Almost, she thought. Almost. Then her computer chimed with an incoming email. The sender address was a string of random characters that routed through 3 different anonymizing servers before reaching her inbox. The subject line contained no text. The body of the email contained 6 words. "You don't know what you're walking into." Claire read it twice. Then she read it a 3rd time. Then she closed the email, leaned back in her chair, and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Someone on this base knew she was here. Someone who had access to an internal IP address. Someone who wanted her to know they were watching. The question was not who had sent it. She would figure that out. The question was why they wanted her to know and whether the warning was meant to protect her or to stop her. She opened the email again. Read it one more time. Then she opened a new document and began preparing for the interviews that would start at 9 o'clock the next morning. There were 16 voices that deserved to be heard. She was going to make sure every single one of them was. 2 hours after she walked out of that mess hall, Claire Harmon was still at her desk when First Sergeant Earl Decker knocked on her office door. He did not wait to be invited in. He opened the door, stepped inside, closed it behind him, and stood at attention with the automatic precision of a man who had been doing that for 23 years and would probably do it until the day he died. He was 45 years old, and he looked it honestly, the kind of face that had been shaped by decades of early mornings and hard choices, and the particular erosion that comes from caring deeply about things you cannot fully control. "At ease, First Sergeant," Claire said. "Sit down." He sat. He studied her face the way experienced soldiers study situations, looking for the information that was not being offered voluntarily. "The entire base is talking," he said. "Word travels fast in a place like this. It always does." "Was it planned, all of it, every detail?" Decker was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've known Wade Colton for 3 years, served alongside him, watched him mentor young Marines, watched him pull a corporal out of a burning vehicle during a training exercise without hesitating for a single second." He paused. "I've also watched him make female personnel feel unsafe in their own workspace, watched him use his size and his reputation as instruments of control, watched the system protect him every single time someone tried to hold him accountable." He looked at his hands. "I filed 2 complaints. Holloway buried both of them." "I know. He called me into his office after the second one, told me I was misreading SEAL culture, that if I had a problem with how Special Operations personnel conducted themselves, Maybe I wasn't suited to work alongside them. He looked up. Didn't threaten me explicitly. Didn't have to. First Sergeant, Claire said, I need your testimony on record. Everything you filed, everything you witnessed, everything that was buried. Can you be ready? Decker looked at her steadily. Agent Harmon, I've been ready for 3 years. He paused. I have a daughter, 17 years old. She wants to enlist when she graduates. Follow her old man into the Marines. His jaw tightened slightly on the last words. I need to know the institution she's walking into is going to be worth that. Claire held his gaze. Then let's make sure it is. After Decker left, she sat alone in her office for a long moment with the morning light coming through the window and the sound of formation drills drifting up from the parade ground below. Then she opened her interview schedule and began. Brooke Calloway arrived at 9 o'clock in dress uniform, dark circles under her eyes that no amount of military bearing could fully conceal. Claire set the recorder on the desk between them and walked her through it again from the beginning. Supply Room C, October 15th, 1700 hours. The door locking. The words that were not a misunderstanding and had never been a misunderstanding. The smile on Colton's face that said he already knew nothing would happen to him. When they finished, Claire did not immediately stop the recording. Brooke, she said, I need to tell you something I found in Holloway's access logs. Brooke looked up. The morning after you filed your complaint, before Holloway called you into his office, he accessed the medical records of another enlisted personnel who had reported an incident involving Colton, a private named Cody Whitfield. Whitfield had not yet filed a formal complaint. The incident had only been logged internally by the medical officer on duty. Claire watched Brooke process this. Holloway was monitoring the system, looking for reports before they became official complaints. He was intervening early before anything could be entered into the formal record. The silence in the room was the particular silence of a person understanding something that changes the entire shape of what they thought they knew. He wasn't just burying complaints, Brooke said. He was intercepting them. He was running a system, Claire said, and he had been running it for a long time. Private Cody Whitfield arrived at 11. 22 years old, red-haired, freckled, with the lean build of someone who spent serious time in the gym and the careful posture of someone who had learned that being too relaxed around certain people carried consequences. He sat down across from Claire and placed his hands flat on his knees and looked at her with the wary directness of a young man who had decided that whatever was going to happen next could not possibly be worse than the past 3 weeks. Tell me about the gym, Claire said. His jaw set. 3 weeks ago, early morning 0600, I was doing pull-ups when Master Sergeant Colton entered. I dropped from the bar and stood at attention, but I wasn't fast enough. He said I disrespected him by not standing the moment he walked in. That in SEAL teams, that kind of disrespect would get you dropped for insubordination. What did you do? Apologized. Stayed at attention. Kept apologizing. Thought that would be enough. He looked at the wall behind her. It wasn't. Walk me through what happened next. He grabbed my PT shirt and slammed me against the wall. I felt 2 of my ribs go. Couldn't breathe. He held me there and told me accidents happen in training all the time and that I should be more careful. Cody's voice was level. The levelness of someone who has rehearsed a story until the emotion has been compressed into something manageable. Then he let me go and walked out like nothing had happened. Claire slid the medical report across the desk. You went to medical and told them you fell during your workout. Yes, ma'am. Why? The question hung in the air. Cody looked at the report, at the words in the original emergency room notes that the attending physician had written before the file was accessed and altered. Injury pattern inconsistent with described mechanism. Patient reluctant to provide details. Suspicious for assault. Because everyone says Colton is untouchable, Cody said. Because I'm a private and he's a master sergeant with a combat record. Because I watched what happened to Specialist Calloway when she tried to report him, and I knew what would happen to me. He looked up. Was I wrong? No, Claire said honestly. You weren't wrong about how the system had been operating, but the system is about to change. She paused. Cody, this medical report was altered. Major Holloway accessed your file 2 days after the incident and reclassified your injuries as a routine training mishap. The original physician's notes were buried under administrative corrections, but the original is still in the system and I have it. Something moved through Cody Whitfield's face, the specific expression of a person who has been telling themselves for 3 weeks that no one would ever believe them, suddenly confronted with evidence that someone not only believed them, but had already done the work to prove it. "What happens now?" he said. "Now you decide whether you want your testimony on record." Claire held his gaze. "I won't pressure you. I won't tell you it won't be hard. But I will tell you this. You are not the first person Colton did this to. You won't be the last unless someone stops him. And the only thing that stops him is the truth spoken out loud in a place where it cannot be buried." Cody Whitfield looked at his hands for a long moment. Then he looked up. "Tell me where to sign," he said. Lieutenant Renata Ashby arrived at 2 in the afternoon with the bearing of someone who had made peace with whatever was coming. 29 years old, 8 years of service, the steady eyes of a person who has been quietly furious for a very long time and has finally found an outlet for it that does not require her to sacrifice everything she has built. She placed her phone on the desk between them without being asked. On the screen was an app Claire recognized, a secure messaging platform. The header of the group visible on screen read, "Colton's Guard." "How long have you had access?" Claire asked. 6 months. A member left his phone unlocked in the officer's lounge. Another female lieutenant saw it, started screenshotting. She brought it to me and to Lieutenant Morris. We've been collecting ever since. Renata's voice was calm and precise. "We knew if we reported it through normal channels it would disappear, so we waited until we had enough that it couldn't disappear." "Show me." Renata scrolled. Claire leaned forward and read. The content was worse than the summary she had been given, not just in its specifics but in its architecture. Photos of female personnel taken without consent from angles that required access to private spaces. Sexual rankings presented as casual entertainment. Crude, detailed commentary about women's bodies and perceived vulnerabilities. But underneath all of that, threaded through hundreds of messages across 32 months, was the structural evidence that transformed a collection of degrading conversations into something with legal weight. Messages from Major Holloway coordinating the disappearance of complaints. Updates shared between the executive officers at Fort Bragg and Camp Lejeune about records management and transfer timing. Strategic discussions about how to handle situations when complaints got traction despite their efforts. A vocabulary of code words that meant exactly what they appeared to mean once you understood the pattern. "Renata," Claire said quietly, "this is not just harassment. These messages document a coordinated conspiracy to suppress criminal complaints across 3 military installations over a period of at least 5 years. "I know what it is," Renata said. "I've known for 6 months. I've been waiting for someone with the authority to do something about it." Claire studied the screen. "There's a subset within this group, 8 people, former SEALs all in command positions. They call themselves the Shield." Renata's voice was flat. "The name appears for the first time 18 months ago. Before that, they were just members of the larger group. After that, there's a separate layer of coordination, discussions about identifying complaints before they gain traction, about managing transfers, about which investigations to monitor." She paused. "There's a message from 14 months ago that discusses a complaint at Fort Bragg that was getting too much attention. A female lieutenant who was threatening to go to the Inspector General. 3 days later, Colton was transferred to Camp Lejeune. The complaint was withdrawn within a week." Claire looked at the dates, cross-referenced them mentally with the transfer record she had memorized. Fort Bragg, January 2019 to March 2021. 4 complaints, 3 buried, 1 resolved by transfer, when the complainant was the daughter of a congressman and couldn't be quietly dismissed. Camp Lejeune, April 2021 to February 2023. 5 complaints, 4 buried, 1 prompting another transfer when a lieutenant threatened the Inspector General. Camp Pendleton, March 2023 to present. 7 complaints, 5 buried. 3 bases, 3 executive officers, all former SEALs, all members of the same group. Each time the pressure built beyond manageable levels, Colton was moved to fresh ground, and the network ensured his record arrived clean. She had suspected the shape of it. Seeing it documented in their own words was something different. "Screenshot everything," Claire said. "Every message. Send it to my secure server tonight, all of it." Then she found what she had not been expecting. She almost missed it. It was buried in a thread from 18 months ago between messages that were functionally unremarkable in the context of everything else. A notification to the group from a member identified only by a number, a standard update about a complaint being managed, and a response 2 lines from a username that cross-referenced against her personnel database resolved to a single name. Colonel Raymond Voss, the base commander, the man who would be overseeing the tribunal. The message was brief, 3 words: handle it quietly. He had not filed anything, had not actively participated in suppression, but he had known. 14 months ago, Colonel Raymond Voss had been told that a formal complaint against Wade Colton was being managed by members of his command network, and he had responded with 3 words that told them exactly what he wanted. Claire sat with that information for a moment. Then she closed the screen, noted the timestamp, and filed it in the part of her mind where she kept the things that needed to be used carefully. "Renata," she said, "your testimony at tribunal is going to matter, significantly." "I know." Renata picked up her phone. "I've known that since the first night I started reading those messages. I've been ready." The call from Colonel Voss came at 7 in the evening. He wanted the tribunal moved up, 48 hours instead of 72. His reasoning was operational, but Claire understood the actual logic. The faster they moved, the less time the network had to coordinate a response. She agreed to the timeline and extracted her guarantees: full victim access, all evidence admissible, nothing conducted in closed session. After she hung up, she sat in her office in the growing dark and looked at her evidence wall. 16 photographs, names underneath each one. The shape of 5 years of systematic harm held together by an infrastructure of loyalty that had been allowed to call itself brotherhood for long enough that the people inside it had forgotten the difference. She was still looking at it when her phone rang at 10:47. Cody Whitfield's number. She answered immediately. "I can't do it." His voice was tight, controlled, the voice of someone working very hard to hold a decision together. "I'm sorry, I tried. I can't." Claire was already reaching for her jacket. "Where are you?" "My barracks room." "Don't go anywhere." She walked across the base in the dark, through the streets of a military installation that never fully slept past lit windows and distant voices and the sound of a base living its nighttime life. She found his room on the 2nd floor of Barracks Building 7 and knocked twice. He opened the door. He was still in uniform, which told her he had not slept, which told her this decision had been sitting on him for hours. His face had the particular exhaustion of someone who has been in a fight with themselves and is not sure who won. She did not ask him anything. She stepped inside and sat down in the chair by the desk and waited. "Someone came to see me," he said finally. "This afternoon after my interview with you. A lieutenant colonel I'd never met. He said he was from Fort Bragg. Said he was just checking in, making sure I understood my options." Cody sat down on the edge of his bunk. "He said if I chose not to testify, there were people who could make sure my transfer request to Pendleton North went through, that my record would stay clean, that I'd have a real career ahead of me." He looked at his hands. "He didn't threaten me. He didn't have to." "What was his name?" "Briggs. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Briggs." Claire kept her face neutral. "Marcus Briggs. Fort Bragg, Executive Officer, 2019 to 2021. Member of the SHIELD. He had flown to California specifically for this conversation." "Cody," she said. He looked up. "I'm not going to tell you what to decide. That has to be yours." She looked at him steadily. "But I want to ask you one question, and I want you to actually think about it before you answer." He waited. 10 years from now, when someone younger than you is standing where you're standing right now, facing the same choice you're facing, what do you want to have done? The room was very quiet. Cody Whitfield looked at the floor for a long time. When he looked up, something in his face had changed. Not dramatically. Just the small, irreversible shift of a person who has found the bottom of a decision and discovered it is solid. "He recorded the conversation," Cody said. Claire went very still. "Briggs, when he came to talk to me, I had a feeling something was wrong about it. The way he showed up out of nowhere. The way he knew things about my transfer request that he shouldn't have known. So I recorded him. Cody reached into his jacket pocket and set a small digital recorder on the desk between them. I got everything. His name, his offer, his exact words about making problems go away. Claire looked at the recorder. Then she looked at Cody Whitfield, 22 years old. 2 cracked ribs, 3 weeks of silence, and the instinct to document. Because something felt wrong. You recorded a lieutenant colonel making you an offer to suppress your testimony, she said. Yes, ma'am. Cody, that recording doesn't just save your testimony. That recording proves active obstruction of justice. It puts Marcus Briggs in a room making an illegal offer on behalf of a conspiracy that stretches across 3 military installations. She paused. Do you understand what you just handed me? He looked at her. Then something moved across his face that was not quite a smile, but was in the same neighborhood. I think so, he said. The bar video arrived at 11:15 in another anonymous email from another randomized address that routed through internal Camp Pendleton servers. The subject line was blank. The attachment was a video file 12 minutes long shot on a phone camera in poor light with excellent audio. Claire pressed play. Colton was in civilian clothes at a bar. She did not recognize a bourbon in his hand and the particular looseness of a man. 3 drinks passed his good judgment. Around him, 3 other men in civilian clothes leaned in with the attention of people watching someone perform. She thinks she's so smart, Colton said. Coming onto my base, my territory, knocking me down in front of my people like that's going to mean something. One of the men said something she couldn't make out. Colton laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. I've got people, Pentagon people. This whole thing goes away inside a week. She gets reassigned somewhere cold, and I go back to being exactly who I am. He took a long drink. 16 complaints in 5 years. You know how many stuck 0. Because the system works for people like me. Warriors, not washed-up Delta grudges with something to prove. Claire watched the rest of it without expression. Then she sat in the silence of her office for 60 seconds looking at the blank screen. Then she forwarded it to the Tribunal panel, to Pentagon oversight, and to her 3 journalist contacts with a 72-hour embargo. If anyone tried to shut the Tribunal down, the embargo lifted automatically. Her phone rang at 1 in the morning. She answered on the second ring. Agent Harmon? The voice was male senior, the voice of a man who had not been kept waiting in a very long time. This is General Philip Hartman, Pentagon Personnel Division. I'm calling to make one final attempt at a reasonable resolution before this tribunal causes damage that cannot be undone. I'm listening, General. Master Sergeant Colton retires immediately. General discharge under honorable conditions. Full benefits. No tribunal, no public proceeding. The victims receive compensation and counseling. Everyone moves forward. And the shield. The 3 executive officers who buried complaints across 3 bases, the 47 members of the chat group. Internal administrative review, appropriate consequences handled quietly. No. A pause. Agent Harmon, you're a 28-year-old field investigator with 2 years of post-service experience. I have been navigating institutional decisions of this complexity for 30 years. I am asking you to consider the broader picture. General Hartman, 2 years ago, the broader picture included Lieutenant Colonel Aaron Steele's 20-year career, and someone who looked a great deal like you decided that picture was worth more than my testimony. Her voice was even, not cold, just exact. That calculation ended my time in the unit I bled for. It did not end this conversation, because I am having this conversation specifically because that calculation was wrong, and I intend to make sure it cannot be made again. Silence on the line. You're making a mistake. Tribunal convenes in 6 hours, General. I suggest you send someone to observe. They'll want detailed notes. She ended the call, set the phone down, looked at the ceiling. Her hands were shaking slightly. She noticed that. She pressed them flat on the desk and breathed steadily until they stopped. Then her phone rang again. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail. Something made her answer. Agent Harmon? The voice was male, mid-40s, the measured cadence of a man choosing his words carefully. You don't know my name. I'm a former Navy SEAL. I've been a member of the SHIELD for 3 years. A pause. I sent you the emails. Both of them. I sent you the bar video. Claire sat very still. I've been trying to find a way out of this group for 14 months, the voice continued. Ever since I read Cody Whitfield's original medical report. The one with the physician's notes that Holloway buried. Another pause. I have children, a daughter 16, a son 13, and I could not read that report and continue being the person who read it. I need your name, Claire said. I'll give you everything. My name, my full membership history, every action I participated in or witnessed. Complete testimony. He paused. But I need to know my family is protected before I put my name on anything. I can arrange that. You have my word. There's something else. His voice dropped slightly. The name at the top of the shield. The person who founded it, who has been running it since the beginning. It's not Holloway. Holloway is mid-level. The person at the top has a rank you haven't looked at yet. Claire did not speak. She waited. He told her the name. She wrote it down on the notepad on her desk, stared at it for a long moment. Then she underlined it once slowly and set the pen down. Tribunal convenes at 0900, she said. Can you be there? Yes. Then I'll see you in 6 hours. She ended the call, looked at the name on the notepad, looked at the evidence wall with its 16 photographs and its 5 years of documented harm, and its network of men who had believed until this week that belief in each other was sufficient to make them untouchable. She thought about Brooke Calloway and her Honda Civic with her white-knuckled hands, about Cody Whitfield with his 2 cracked ribs and his quiet recorder, about Renata Ashby spending 6 months in patient, furious documentation, about Earl Decker filing 2 complaints that went nowhere because he had a daughter who wanted to wear this uniform someday. She picked up the pen again. Beneath the name she had just written, she wrote a single word, tomorrow. Then she closed the notepad, turned off the desk lamp, and spent the next 4 hours preparing the case that would either change the institution she had given the best years of her life to, or confirm that the institution did not deserve what she had given. Either way, she was going to find out. The courtroom at Camp Pendleton had been built to hold 200 people comfortably. By 8:55 on Friday morning, it held considerably more than that, and the overflow had spilled into the hallway outside where Marines and officers stood 3 deep against the walls, listening through the open doors. Word had traveled the way word always travels on a military base, through early morning conversations in the mess hall, through text messages sent between barracks rooms, through the particular urgency that moves through a closed community when something unprecedented is about to happen. 2. Claire arrived at 8:30 and sat at the prosecution table alone, her 3 binders of evidence arranged in precise order in front of her. She did not look at the gallery. She did not look at the defense table where Commander Frank Pelletier, Navy JAG, was already seated with his own materials and the controlled expression of a man preparing to fight a battle he suspected he had already lost. She looked at her binders and went through her opening statement one final time in her mind, the way she had gone through it 4 times the night before, checking the logic of each sequence, the weight of each piece of evidence, the precise order in which the story needed to be told so that it could not be dismantled or reframed or quietly set aside. Wade Colton entered at 8:58, flanked by Pelletier and an enlisted aide. He was in his dress uniform. The seal trident was on his chest. He had chosen to wear it, which told Claire something about where his mind was clinging to the identity that had defined him for 15 years, because it was the only defense he had left that felt real to him. He did not look at her when he sat down. The tribunal panel entered at 9 o'clock precisely. Colonel Andrea Marsh came first. 52 years old, 30 years of service. The bearing of a woman who had spent 3 decades earning authority in spaces that had not always welcomed her, and had emerged from that process with the particular unshakable steadiness of someone who had never once been given anything for free. She took the center seat at the elevated bench and looked out at the packed courtroom with an expression that communicated without words that she had seen complicated situations before and intended to handle this one with the same rigor she brought to all of them. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Finch took the seat to her left. Former JAG, meticulous by the book in the way that sometimes frustrated prosecutors and sometimes saved them. Lieutenant Colonel Gerald Haynes took the seat to her right. Infantry background, 3 deployments, the quiet watchfulness of a man who understood military culture from the inside and was not easily impressed by credentials alone. Colonel Marsh called the courtroom to order. This tribunal convenes to address charges against Master Sergeant Wade Colton, United States Navy. 3 counts sexual harassment, 2 counts assault, 8 counts conduct unbecoming a service member. She looked at Claire. Agent Harmon, your opening statement. Claire stood. She looked at the panel. Then she looked at the gallery at the faces of 200 military personnel and the dozens more standing in the hallway, and she understood that what she said in the next few minutes would frame everything that followed, not just for this tribunal, but for everyone in this room who would carry today's events with them for the rest of their careers. Colonel Marsh, members of the tribunal, she said, what you are going to hear today is not the story of one bad decision. It is not the story of a decorated veteran who lost his way. It is not a misunderstanding, a cultural difference, or a failure of communication. She paused. What you are going to hear is the documented history of a system designed and operated by specific people in specific positions over a period of 5 years and across 3 military installations, for the specific purpose of ensuring that Wade Colton never faced accountability for what he did to the people under his authority. The room was completely silent. The prosecution will demonstrate that Master Sergeant Colton engaged in a pattern of sexual harassment and assault spanning 5 years and 16 victims. We will demonstrate that 12 formal complaints were systematically suppressed by a coordinated network of former Special Operations personnel in command positions who called themselves the Shield. We will demonstrate that this network monitored the complaint system, intercepted reports before they became formal records, coordinated transfers when pressure became unmanageable, and actively obstructed justice as recently as 48 hours ago. She let that land. This is not one man's misconduct. This is institutional corruption, and it ends today. Pelletier objected to the characterization. Colonel Marsh overruled him. Claire sat down. Brooke Calloway took the witness stand first. She walked to the box with her spine straight and her hands steady, and the expression of someone who has decided that the only way through a thing is directly through it. She was sworn in. She stated her name and rank and assignment. And then in a voice that was quiet and precise and did not waver, once she told the tribunal what had happened in Supply Room C on October 15th. The locked door, the words, the hands that did not stop when she said stop. Pelletier cross-examined carefully, probing for inconsistencies in timeline, suggesting the interpretation of friendly mentorship, questioning whether a 10-second incident over clothing truly constituted assault under the relevant statutes. Brooke answered each question with the same quiet precision she had brought to her testimony. When Pelletier suggested she might have misread the situation, she looked at him directly and said, "He locked the door. He told me Navy SEALs take what they want. Then he touched me. There was no misreading." Pelletier moved on. Claire called Cody Whitfield. He walked to the box looking younger than 22 and more composed than he had any right to be after 3 weeks of cracked ribs and silence. He described the gym, the wall, the sound his ribs made, the message delivered without words that accidents happen in training all the time. Then Claire introduced the recording. Pelletier was on his feet before she finished the sentence. "Objection. The recording was made without the knowledge or consent of the recorded party and is therefore inadmissible. The recording was made by Private Whitfield of a conversation directed at him on a military installation by an officer who was attempting to obstruct an active federal investigation," Claire said. "Under federal statute, a party to a conversation may legally record that conversation without notifying the other party. Private Whitfield was a party to this conversation. The recording is admissible." Colonel Marsh considered for a moment. "Objection overruled. The recording will be entered into evidence." The courtroom listened to Marcus Briggs' voice offering Cody Whitfield a clean record and a favorable transfer in exchange for his silence. The offer was explicit. The intent was unmistakable. When the recording ended, Lieutenant Colonel Haynes on the panel had written something in his notes and underlined it twice. Lieutenant Renata Ashby followed. She walked to the stand with the composure of someone who had been carrying evidence for 6 months and was finally setting it down in the right place. She described the chat group, the photographs, the rankings, the coordinated language of men who believed their private communications were permanent. Claire walked her through the key messages methodically, the timestamps, the usernames, the operational discussions about managing complaints and coordinating transfers. She projected screenshots on the courtroom display one after another until the pattern was so thoroughly documented that no reasonable person in the room could have described what they were seeing as anything other than what it was. 47 members, 32 months, 3 bases, 1 purpose. First Sergeant Earl Decker took the stand last. He described his 2 complaints and their disappearance. He described the meeting with Holloway and the message that was communicated without being stated directly. He described 3 years of watching and filing and trying and failing and trying again anyway. Colonel Marsh asked him why he had kept trying when the outcome was predictably the same each time. Decker looked at the panel. "Because I have a daughter who wants to wear this uniform," he said, "and I needed to know that when she does, the people in this institution will make the right choice when it matters. I kept filing because someone had to believe that was still possible." The courtroom held that for a moment. Then Pelletier stood and said, "The defense calls Master Sergeant Colton." Colton walked to the witness stand with the bearing of a man who had decided that the only way to save what remained of his reputation was to perform his way out of it. He was sworn in. Pelletier led him through his service record, his deployments, his decorations, trying to rebuild the architecture of the legend that had been demolished on a mess hall floor 3 days ago. Colonel Marsh interrupted after 4 minutes. "Commander Pelletier, the accused service record is not in dispute. Move to the relevant charges." Pelletier pivoted. Colton testified that the supply room encounter with Brooke had been a mentorship conversation that she had misinterpreted, that the gym incident with Cody had been an aggressive but legitimate training correction, that his interaction with Claire in the mess hall had been a professional inquiry into her presence at a restricted facility that she had responded to with unprovoked violence. He said these things with complete fluency, the fluency of a man who had been telling versions of these stories for 5 years and had come to inhabit them as fully as the original events. Then Claire stood. "Master Sergeant Colton, you testified that you were checking equipment inventory when you encountered Specialist Calloway in Supply Room C. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And you testified that you may have placed a hand on her shoulder in a friendly mentor-like manner?" "Yes." "Supply Room C in Building 14 has an interior deadbolt that can only be engaged from inside the room. Did you lock the door?" A pause. "I may have closed it for privacy." "Locked it, yes or no?" "I don't recall precisely." Specialist Calloway testified that she had to physically push past you to reach the door and escape. That suggests the door was not simply closed. That suggests she was trapped. Were you aware that she felt trapped? She misunderstood the situation. She filed a formal complaint the following morning describing the specific words you used. "Navy SEALs take what they want." Did you say those words? I don't recall that specific phrasing. Claire picked up Brooke's original complaint from the binder. "This is Specialist Calloway's formal complaint filed within 24 hours of the incident. The phrase appears verbatim. She quoted you directly the morning after while the memory was immediate. Either she fabricated a specific quote in a formal complaint within 24 hours of an incident that did not happen, or you said those words and are now under oath telling this panel you don't recall them." She looked at him. "Which is it?" Pelletier objected. Argumentative. Sustained. Claire moved on. She walked Colton through the mess hall incident against the video evidence, each discrepancy between his testimony and the recording precise and documented. She introduced his personnel file, the 3 formal reprimands across 3 bases, each one for a variation of the same underlying behavior, and asked him to explain the pattern. He called it circumstantial. He called it the inevitable friction of commanding from the front. He called it the price of holding standards that lesser personnel could not meet. Then Claire pulled up the bar video. The courtroom watched Wade Colton tell 3 men in a bar that 16 complaints had been filed against him and 0 had stuck because the system worked for warriors like him. His voice filled the room with a clarity that no amount of courtroom composure could retroactively explain away. When it ended, Claire said, "Master Sergeant Colton, you testified under oath today that you were unaware of the network of personnel coordinating to suppress complaints against you. But in this video, recorded 48 hours ago, you express complete confidence that specific people at the Pentagon will make this investigation disappear. How do you reconcile those 2 statements?" 2. Colton looked at the screen. Then he looked at the panel. Then he looked at the gallery. He was searching for something in those faces, the recognition, the respect, the reflexive deference that 15 years of carefully managed legend had trained people to give him. He did not find it. What he found instead was 200 people looking back at him with the neutral attention of people waiting to see what the evidence said. "No further questions," Claire said and sat down. Pelletier's motion came 20 minutes later. He stood with the practiced urgency of a man playing his last card. Colonel Marsh, the defense moves to strike all evidence gathered and presented by Agent Harmon on the grounds of conflict of interest. Agent Harmon has a documented personal history of allegations against a superior officer that were investigated and found to lack sufficient evidence. Her presence in this case represents a pattern of personal grievance being pursued through federal investigative authority. The evidence she has gathered is therefore tainted by bias and should be excluded. The room stirred. Colonel Marsh looked at Claire. Agent Harmon, I'll hear your response, not as prosecutor, as a witness to your own conduct and motivation in this investigation. Claire stood. She stood for a moment without speaking. Then she walked around the prosecution table and stood in the open space between the tables and the bench, and she looked at the panel and she began. My name is Claire Harmon. I am 28 years old. I served in the United States Army for 8 years. In 2018, I completed Delta Force selection. I was the first woman to do so in 37 years of the unit's existence. I completed that selection by meeting every standard that was required of me, not by being accommodated, not by being given a modified version of the requirement, by meeting it. The room was completely still. In June of 2022, I was deployed to Forward Operating Base Warhorse in Iraq. My team conducted a hostage rescue operation in Mosul. We recovered 4 American civilians from an ISIS cell. All 4 came home alive. 0 friendly casualties. It was the best work I had ever done. She paused. The pause was not for effect. It was because the next part required a different kind of breath. That night, Lieutenant Colonel Aaron Steele came to my quarters. He was my commanding officer. I had served under him for 14 months. I trusted him in the specific way that soldiers trust the people who are responsible for bringing them home. He came to my quarters, and he attempted to rape me. She said it without flinching, without softening it, without the qualifying language that institutions use to make hard things easier to process. I fought back. I broke his nose. I got out. I reported it the same night to the senior officer on base. Someone in the gallery made a sound and suppressed it. The investigation lasted 6 weeks. The investigating officer concluded there was insufficient evidence to support my allegations. Lieutenant Colonel Steele had 20 years of service, 2 Silver Stars, a record that the institution had decided was worth protecting. I had 4 years of service, my own 2 Silver Stars, and the truth. She looked at the panel. They gave me a choice. Continue serving under the command of the man who had assaulted me, or resign honorably and preserve my benefits. I resigned. Because I could not stay in the unit I had given everything to build a life inside, knowing that the institution had looked at what happened to me and decided his career mattered more. Lieutenant Colonel Haynes had stopped writing. He was looking at her directly. Commander Pelletier is correct that I have a personal history with military sexual assault. He is correct that the investigation into my case found insufficient evidence. What he is not correct about is the conclusion he draws from those facts. Her voice was steady, precise. The voice of someone who has rehearsed this moment not in front of a mirror but in the long, quiet hours of 2 years of work. I am not pursuing a personal grievance through federal authority. I am doing the job I took specifically because of what happened to me, because I understood from the inside what the pattern looked like and where the gaps in accountability were and how the network operated to fill those gaps. My history is not a conflict of interest. My history is the qualification. She looked at Colton. He was watching her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not hatred, not contempt. Something quieter and more complicated. I did not come to Camp Pendleton to punish Wade Colton for what Aaron Steele did to me. I came here because Brooke Calloway filed a complaint that was buried before she finished speaking. Because Cody Whitfield told the emergency room doctor he fell during a workout because he was afraid the truth would cost him more than the lie. Because Renata Ashby spent 6 months collecting evidence in silence because there was no one in her chain of command she trusted enough to bring it to. Because Earl Decker filed 2 complaints that disappeared and kept filing anyway because he has a daughter who wants to serve. She looked at the panel one final time. I am not asking this tribunal to convict Wade Colton because of what happened to me. I am asking this tribunal to look at the evidence that 16 people provided at significant personal risk evidence that documents 5 years of harm and the coordinated institutional effort to conceal it and to make the decision that the system failed to make every single time it had the chance. A pause. That is not grievance. That is the job. Pelletier did not cross-examine. Colonel Marsh called a 30-minute recess. Claire sat on a bench outside the courtroom in the California afternoon sunlight and did not move. Brooke found her and sat beside her and took her hand and held it without saying anything, which was exactly right. Cody and Renata came and stood nearby. Decker sat on the other end of the bench and looked at the parade ground with the patience of a man who has learned that the hardest part of doing the right thing is the waiting afterward. They sat together in the sunlight and waited. 23 minutes later, the bailiff appeared at the door. The courtroom rose when the panel returned. Colonel Marsh stood at the bench and looked at the room with the expression of a person who understands the weight of what they are about to say and intends to say it with the gravity it deserves. This tribunal has reached a verdict on all charges against Master Sergeant Wade Colton. The silence was absolute. On the charge of sexual harassment, 3 counts. We find the accused guilty. Colton's face did not move. On the charge of assault, 2 counts. We find the accused guilty. Pelletier placed a hand on Colton's arm. Colton moved it away. On the charge of conduct unbecoming a service member, 8 counts. We find the accused guilty on all counts. The gallery erupted. Colonel Marsh brought it down with her gavel without raising her voice. Sentencing will be rendered immediately. She looked at Colton with the measured gravity of someone delivering a judgment they have arrived at through careful reasoning and intend to stand behind entirely. Master Sergeant Wade Colton, this tribunal finds that the evidence presented documents not a series of isolated incidents, but a sustained and deliberate pattern of abuse enabled by an institutional network that prioritized loyalty over accountability and reputation over truth. You have violated the trust placed in you by the men and women under your authority. You have exploited the systems designed to protect them. You have caused harm that will outlast this proceeding. She drew a breath. Your sentence is as follows. Dishonorable discharge from the United States Navy. Reduction in rank to E1. Forfeiture of all pay benefits and pension. The assault charges will be referred to civilian court for criminal prosecution. You are remanded to custody effective immediately. The bailiff approached the defense table. Colton stood. His hands were steady, which was perhaps the last true thing about him in that room, the physical control of 15 years of training that remained even when everything else had been stripped away. The bailiff reached for the trident on his chest. Colton looked down at the bailiff's hands, removing it. He looked at the small metal insignia that had defined him for 15 years. Then he looked across the room at Claire. She met his eyes. She felt nothing that resembled triumph. She felt the specific exhaustion of work that has finally been completed, and beneath it, something she had not felt in 2 years. A loosening. The faint, unfamiliar sensation of a weight that had been present so long she had stopped noticing it beginning to lift. The MPs let him out. Colonel Marsh continued. This panel recommends the immediate court-martial of Major Brett Holloway and Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Briggs on charges of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. All 47 members of the identified network will be subject to administrative review. The Inspector General will conduct a comprehensive audit of complaint processing procedures across all special operations units. She paused. This panel further recommends that the case of Lieutenant Colonel Aaron Steele be reopened and reinvestigated in light of testimony presented in these proceedings. Claire sat very still. She had not expected that. This tribunal is adjourned. The gavel fell. Colonel Raymond Voss found her outside 20 minutes later, standing in the sunlight with her jacket over her arm, watching a group of junior Marines cross the parade ground in the middle distance. Agent Harmon. He stopped beside her. He was looking at the same parade ground. You did what needed to be done. Claire looked at him. She thought about the 3 words he had sent 14 months ago. Handle it quietly. She thought about what those 3 words had cost the people who had needed someone in his position to make a different choice. She did not say any of that. Yes, sir, she said. It did need to be done. Something moved through his expression. Understanding, she thought. The particular understanding of a man who recognizes that he is being given the space to reckon with himself privately rather than publicly, and who understands exactly what that courtesy is worth. 2 months later, Colonel Raymond Voss submitted his early retirement paperwork. He left Camp Pendleton on a Tuesday morning without ceremony. The email from Pentagon Personnel Division arrived on a Thursday afternoon, 6 weeks after the tribunal, while Claire was sitting at her desk at the Silent Ranks Foundation office in San Diego with a cup of coffee and a case file from Fort Hood. The subject line read, R.E. Case File Lieutenant Colonel Aaron Steele, Reinvestigation Results. She looked at the subject line for a long moment. Then she opened it. The reinvestigation had concluded. Based on testimony presented at the Colton Tribunal and subsequent outreach by the DIA, 3 additional women had come forward. All 3 had been assaulted by Aaron Steele before Claire. All 3 had stayed silent because they had watched what happened when she spoke up and had understood the message the institution was sending. The reinvestigation found sufficient evidence to support the original allegations. Lieutenant Colonel Aaron Steele's retirement status was being changed from honorable to general discharge, under other than honorable conditions, effective immediately. He would forfeit his pension and all associated benefits. Claire read the email twice. Then she set her coffee down and looked out the window at the San Diego harbor, at the light moving on the water, at the ordinary Friday afternoon life of a city that did not know or need to know what had just happened, in a document on her desk. She thought about 3 women she had never met who had been carrying a story like hers for longer than she had, who had watched her report and seen what the institution did with the truth and made the only rational calculation available to them, who had decided 6 weeks ago that the calculation had changed. She had not cried since Iraq. She had trained herself out of it the way she had trained herself out of a great many things that felt like vulnerabilities in spaces that punished vulnerability. But the thing that moved through her now was not grief. It was not even relief exactly. It was something closer to the feeling of a door opening in a room that had been sealed for a very long time, and the air coming through it being cooler and cleaner than anything that had been available inside. She pressed her hands flat on the desk and let herself feel it. After a while, she wiped her eyes, picked up her coffee, and opened the Fort Hood case file. 3 months after the tribunal, the Silent Ranks Foundation occupied a suite of offices on the 3rd floor of a building 2 blocks from the San Diego waterfront. The sign beside the door was simple, a name and a number. The number was answered every day between 7 in the morning and 10 at night by someone who understood from personal experience what it meant to call it. Brooke Calloway had left the Marines on an honorable discharge 6 weeks after the tribunal. She sat now at a desk across the hall from Claire's, running victim intake and support coordination with the methodical precision of a former intelligence analyst who had found a mission worthy of her skills. Renata Ashby was still serving, assigned to the Inspector General's office at the Pentagon, leading the audit of complaint processing procedures in special operations units. She sent Claire updates twice a week. The audit was finding what they had both expected it to find. Cody Whitfield had been promoted. He had spoken at 2 base-level training sessions about his experience: the assault, the silence, the recording, and the decision to stop being silent. The response from male personnel had been something he had not expected: recognition. More than one young Marine had found him afterward and said a version of the same thing. That they had not known it could happen to them. That they had not known they were allowed to say something. Earl Decker retired on a Friday in June. His daughter enlisted the following Monday. She went to boot camp knowing that her father had spent 3 years trying to change the institution she was entering, and that the institution had finally listened. On a Tuesday morning in early September, Claire was at her desk reviewing the Fort Hood file when her office phone rang. Brooke's voice came through the intercom. "Vic, new intake. Female First Lieutenant Fort Hood. Says her commanding officer assaulted her 7 months ago. Complaint was filed, complaint disappeared." Claire set down the Fort Hood file, picked up a fresh notepad, uncapped her pen. "Put her through," she said. The line clicked. A silence, then breathing. The specific, careful breathing of a person deciding whether to trust the door they have just knocked on. "This is the Silent Ranks Foundation," Claire said. "My name is Claire Harmon." She kept her voice even and warm and entirely present. "Tell me what happened. I'm listening." Outside her window, the San Diego harbor moved in the September light, unhurried and indifferent and constant, the way water always is, the way justice almost never is. But sometimes on the right day with the right people, refusing to look away can be